When the county finally approved the demolition of Fairwood High, no one mourned it. The building had been closed for over 15 years, left to rot at the edge of town like a scab no one wanted to touch. Mold had taken the ceilings, vines had split the brickwork, and raccoons nested in the science labs. What once held pep rallies and prom proposals now held silence, graffiti, and whispers. But the worst part was the lockers, especially Locker 13. Everyone in town knew the story. 15 years ago, a student named Jacob Marin was found inside Locker 13, folded, stuffed like a rag doll. Not murdered, not beaten, just crushed, as if the space had shrunk around him. There was no blood, no wounds, but every bone in his body had shattered inward, like he'd been sucked into himself. The hallway was sealed that night. No investigation, no cleanup. They just welded the locker shut and chained the corridor. The school closed 6 months later. That's where I come in. I'm a documentarian. I specialize in rot core, videos about abandoned buildings, their history, and what still lingers inside. For my latest project, I got permission to film the final walkthrough of Fairwood before the demolition crew came in. I arrived with a flashlight, 2 cameras, and a mic clipped to my jacket. Daylight was already fading when I stepped through the rusted front doors. The air inside was heavy, old, like a sealed tomb cracked open for the first time in decades. The tile floors were warped. Lockers sagged on broken hinges. Mold crawled up the walls like veins. I started rolling. "Fairwood High School," I said softly, walking through the main hallway. Shuttered since 2010. Sealed from the public. Everything left behind. No one's been inside. Until now. I passed classrooms where the desks still sat in rows. Crumpled tests littered the floors. One blackboard still had a half-erased sentence. "Due Friday, personal ethics essay." I turned the corner into the West Wing. That's where it started. My camera, brand new, fully charged, glitched. A burst of static fuzzed across the screen. Then, for half a second, the hallway in the viewfinder changed. No mold. No rot. Just pristine white walls and lockers gleaming under fluorescent lights. And students. Dozens of them standing silently, facing their lockers. I pulled the camera down. The hallway was empty again. The West Wing was the oldest part of the building. And at the far end, half buried in shadow and caution tape, was a stretch of sealed lockers. I knew what I was looking for. Locker 13. The tape crunched underfoot as I approached. The locker was welded shut, just like the story said. But someone had spray-painted a warning across it in thick red letters. "Do not open. He's still in there." I aimed my flashlight at the door. Then, my mic picked something up. A thump. Soft. From inside the locker. I froze. Another thump. Then a faint voice. "Let me out." My breath caught in my throat. This had to be a joke. Someone screwing with me. I turned up the gain on the mic and pressed my ear to the cold metal. "I can't breathe. Please." I backed away. "This is incredible," I whispered to the camera. "There's someone or something inside Locker 13. I'm not alone here." The flashlight flickered. Then the hallway lights above, dead for decades, flickered to life. Dim. Buzzing. Strobing. And then I heard them. Footsteps. Not one set. Dozens. All around me. The sound of shoes on tile. Of lockers opening and slamming shut. Of whispering. I turned in a slow circle. Nobody there. Then, slam. Locker 13 bulged outward. The door, though sealed, flexed, as if something inside had just thrown itself against it. And then, it started to open. The welds snapped one by one with sharp metallic pings. The chains unraveled like snakes slithering to the floor. I raised my camera again just as the door creaked open. Inside was darkness. And then a hand reached out. Gray. Veiny. Fingers too long. Nails sharp and cracked. Then a face emerged. It looked human, almost, but the skin was paper thin, like it had been compressed for too long. The mouth opened in a silent scream. Its eyes were gone, replaced with gaping holes that leaked black fluid. I ran. I didn't think, didn't speak, just ran. But the hallway was wrong. No matter which door I opened, I found the same hallway on the other side. Identical. Locker 13 always at the end. Every exit led back. The creature followed slowly, never rushing, always just out of reach. I could hear it dragging something behind it, metal screeching on tile. Eventually, I collapsed. I hid inside a janitor's closet. I could barely breathe. Then my phone buzzed. One new video. It was me, sitting in the closet, filmed from above like a ceiling cam. I looked up. There was no camera, but a voice came from the screen. You shouldn't have opened it. And then blackness. When I woke, I was outside, in the grass behind the school. The sun was up. The demolition crew was already there. They said they found my gear inside. But not me. They were about to call search and rescue. I checked my camera.
No footy.
My mic? Nothing. But my phone had one video file. Title: You are Locker 13 now. It was just 10 seconds of me, standing in the hallway, smiling. Behind me, the locker was wide open, and something was climbing out. They weren't supposed to find it. During a subway expansion project beneath the city, the drilling rig tore through what they thought was old rock. The vibration sensors had spiked. The dust cloud was odd thicker, almost like soot, and the workers paused to check the cut. Instead of a rock wall, they found rusted steel. A sealed door, riveted shut and crusted with oxidation.
No markings.
No record on the city blueprints. No indication anything had ever existed there. The engineers assumed it was an old utility tunnel, maybe Cold War era. But the door wasn't military. It was railgrade, which didn't make sense. This section of underground was never connected to the train system. They sent me down to investigate. My name's Leonard Halverson, contracted underground historian and documentation expert. I specialize in uncovering lost city infrastructure. I've been inside decommissioned sewer lines, water treatment catacombs, even the old pneumatic mail tunnels in New York. But this was different. This place wasn't forgotten. It was hidden. The door opened with a groan loud enough to vibrate my teeth. We cut the bolts manually and pried the seams until it gave. What lay beyond it chilled me to my core. A full freight terminal. Deep underground. Massive. Empty. The walls were lined with ancient brick and faded white tile. Steel rails ran down the length of the chamber. Massive platforms stretched out on either side. Overhead, flickering light fixtures swayed slightly, though there was no wind. The air was cold. Not fresh cold, dead cold. Like a basement sealed for 100 years. The most unsettling part? It looked used. Not recently, but not long ago either. There was no dust.
No debris.
No signs of natural decay. Just an overwhelming silence, as if the space was holding its breath. I stepped inside and felt the temperature drop by 10 degrees. We documented everything. Photographs, laser mapping,
Audio logs.
The crew stayed topside, but I kept descending deeper. The platforms had benches, old brass nameplates embedded in the floor. Strange codes like T-411, Westbound Manifest 9. Then I found the manifests, papers, hundreds of them, stored in a small office space behind the platform. They were written in a language I didn't recognize. Mostly numbers and symbols, columns of dates and item codes. But one word kept repeating: passage. Not cargo. Not goods. Not passengers.
Passage.
I began noticing other things. Strange things. The rails weren't standard gauge. They were wider and bent in ways that shouldn't have been possible underground, curving up sideways, corkscrewing like a twisted roller coaster track. Then, down one corridor, I found a sign. Dock 6, final arrivals only. The door below it had a spinning wheel lock, like a vault. It opened too easily. Inside was a single train car, pitch black, slick with condensation.
No logos. No identifying marks.
Just matte black metal and a sealed entryway with a tiny porthole window. I peered inside. I couldn't see anything. Just shadows. Until something moved. A figure. Not fast. Not aggressive. Just there. Standing. Watching. I stepped back and turned to leave. That's when the train's headlight turned on. It hadn't been connected to anything. No power.
No wires.
No tracks feeding electricity. But that bulb blazed to life, casting a cone of white through the station. Then the ground began to hum. Low, deep, subaudible at first. My fillings buzzed. My feet tingled. And then, the sound of brakes, of steam, of arrival. Another train, coming from the tunnel. But there was no tunnel, just solid wall where the rails ended. Then the light appeared, growing brighter, until a second black train burst into view through solid concrete like a ghost through fog.
No noise. No vibration.
Just materialization. I ran, down the corridor, back to the entry door, but the steel wasn't there anymore. It had been replaced by a brick wall. Fresh mortar, still wet. I turned. The trains were gone. Only the platform remained. Except now there were people on it. Silent. Still. Facing the tracks. I called out. No answer. I stepped closer. Their clothes were old. Outdated. One man wore a postal uniform from the 1950s. A woman cradled a dead telephone. A child clutched a toy that hadn't existed in decades. And their eyes were open. Not dead. Not alive. Just waiting. That's when I heard the conductor. A voice echoed over an intercom I hadn't noticed. Final call for Manifest 13. All passengers, prepare for return. They moved, in unison, boarding a train that wasn't there. But as they stepped into the empty air, they vanished. One by one, gone. I don't remember how I got out. One moment I was watching the last passenger disappear. The next I was on the surface, lying beside the drill rig, covered in soot and rust. The entry tunnel had collapsed behind me. Or maybe it never existed. But that night I checked my audio recorder. It hadn't shut off. It recorded 5 hours of ambient sound. And in the final 20 seconds, a voice, quiet, distorted, spoke directly into the mic. You have seen the terminal. You may leave once. Not again. I never told the city what I saw. But I checked the blueprints again last week. There's no mention of any structure beneath that street. But there's a new subway stop. It wasn't on the map before.
No announcements. No construcción.
Just a simple name. Manifest Terminal, one way only. And every night, I hear the whistle blow. Far below. Welcoming the next arrival. Blackmore Island wasn't on any tourist maps. It sat off the northeastern coast. A jagged, mist-wrapped rock surrounded by treacherous currents and stories whispered in low tones by fishermen. Its one defining feature, rising stark and pale against the gray Atlantic sky, was the lighthouse. No one had manned it in over 50 years. They said the last keeper vanished. Left his boots on the stairs and his lantern still burning. No sign of a struggle. No body. Just gone. The light, however, kept turning for weeks after. No one could explain how. Eventually, they powered it down and shuttered the island. I wasn't here for ghost stories, at least not officially. I was a maritime historian tasked with writing a final report for the state, which had debated whether to restore the lighthouse or demolish it altogether. I would be the first person in decades to set foot inside. I arrived just after dawn. A small fishing boat dropped me off with a pack of supplies, a lantern, my camera, and a map. The dock groaned under my boots. The air was thick with salt and fog. The island itself was barely more than a steep hill of rock and gnarled grass. The lighthouse stood at the peak, pale stone streaked with moss, windows black and hollow. The iron railing around the top spiraled like a rusted crown. The front door opened too easily. Inside was dust and silence. The spiral staircase stretched upward, hugging the inner wall. I could see the fading footprint patterns of the last person to ever climb it, scuffed outlines in the grime. I followed them. Each floor held the remnants of a life frozen in time. A cot with yellowed sheets. A stove covered in cobwebs. A writing desk with a logbook still open to the final entry. It's watching from the water. I told it I'd keep the light going. I have to. The page was torn near the end. I flipped back through the older entries. They started normal weather reports, supply deliveries. Then came odd phrases. Voices in the fog. Reflections stayed after I moved. Light turned on by itself. My hand trembled. I made it to the top level. The lantern room. Glass windows all around. The massive Fresnel lens sat dormant, its mechanical base caked with rust. But it looked intact, as if it could start spinning at any moment. I stood there for a while, taking notes, photos. Then I saw something strange. Out on the water, a shape. At first I thought it was a boat, but it wasn't moving with the waves. It hovered, upright, like a figure, human-sized, still, staring. I blinked. It was gone. Fog, I told myself. Tricks of light. I descended to the second floor to examine the power systems. That's when I heard it. The click of the lantern gear engaging. Upstairs. I hadn't touched it. I ran up. The lantern was turning. Slow. Grinding. The beam cut through the fog in slow circles, illuminating the sea. But there was no power to the building. I had checked. The wires were rotted, the switchbox destroyed by water damage. And yet, the light turned, and turned. Then the beam swept across the sea, and landed on something. There. That figure again. Closer this time. Still not moving. I zoomed in with my camera. It was a man, or shaped like one. But the proportions were wrong. Too tall. Skin pale and wet like sea flesh. Eyes black pits. Mouth open. Not in a scream but in a smile. The beam swept away. I looked up. The light turned again. And now there were two figures, standing on the rocks below, watching. I ran down the stairs, heart hammering. I had to leave. I couldn't stay the night here. But the front door was shut. Welded shut. Impossible, I had walked through it hours ago. I pounded on it. Nothing. Then I heard the voice. From inside the house. Coming up the stairwell. You lit the light. Now you must keep it turning. Footsteps echoed on the metal. But no one was there. Just the sound. Getting closer. I fled back to the lantern room. Locked the door. The light kept spinning. On its own. Outside the glass. I could now see dozens of figures gathering at the shoreline. Standing ankle-deep in the surf. Silent. Waiting. Each time the light passed over them, they took a step closer. And each time it turned away, they vanished from view. But they were moving. Advancing. The beam was the only thing keeping them at bay. That was last night. The light hasn't stopped since. I haven't slept. The gear keeps grinding. The lens keeps turning. And they're closer now. At the base of the lighthouse. Waiting for the light to stop. I've tried to send messages. Radio static. No one answers. I know what happened to the last keeper now. He didn't vanish. He became part of the light. Part of the duty. You see, the lighthouse isn't here to guide ships. It's here to hold something back. And once you step inside, you're the keeper. Forever.